Matt, welcome to No Hacks.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Great to have you today. So let's talk about you and Conductrix. What led you to that career path? How did you end up studying and being the CEO of Conductrix, a platform-oriented experimentation platform? Privacy-oriented, sorry.
Okay. Well, my background originally was in econometrics, economics, and I used to work in a field called database marketing, which I think your listeners can think of as like data science. So it was basically building predictive models and doing experimentation, A/B tests, multivariate tests. But in with the mediums, the media that we would use would be mail, like direct mail. So there was a lot of statistical analysis on designing whether or not different mail pieces and whatnot would have various efficacy in improving sales and call to actions. So the whole notion of experimentation and the use of predictive modeling and analytics predates the web for sure in marketing. And so I worked at an international advertising agency back in the mid 90s. And then I had a little mini midlife crisis, and I went back to graduate school again for artificial intelligence in Edinburgh. And there I learned about something called reinforcement learning, and multi-armed bandits is a subset of that, which I think some of your listeners or many of your listeners have probably heard a little bit about that. And it was there I kind of had the idea of blending the ideas of the database marketing and experimentation work that we had done back at the agency and in database marketing with some of the newer ideas from reinforcement learning and multi-armed bandits. And so after a machine learning summer school in Ile-de-Ré, France, which is a little island off the coast, in which they harvest salt there, and they have donkeys, and the donkeys wear gingham like pajamas. Like, so you walk around the island, and the donkeys have pants on, and I guess the pants are allegedly there for fleas, so they don't get bit by bugs or fleas for
Okay.
their legs. But they harvest salt there, and it was at that machine learning summer school that I wrote the prototype for Conductrix. The faculty there included Jan LeCun, who's now runs Meta's AI, so he covered things like deep learning. Rich Sutton, who came up with temporal difference learning, which is where the TD learning is in a lot of the reinforcement learnings of deep learning. And so I was there, and that's where we wrote the prototype. And so we went to market in 2010. It was mostly API based, and it allowed customers to use our software for A/B testing and multivariate testing, as well as the bandits and the contextual bandits.
Right. And how is Conductrix different? I mean, there are many platforms for experimentation out there.
Yeah.
How is Conductrix different?
Yep. So, we came to market actually extremely early, and that was a little bit to the detriment because in 2010, there really weren't a ton of platforms. I mean, Google had something out and Adobe was there. And our idea was that we would come to market with a set of modern APIs. So it was all API based. So there's admin APIs, runtime APIs, reporting APIs. And that really was probably too early for the market, especially since we were focusing on the contextual bandits, even though like the A/B testing sort of came for free. It was a little bit too early for the market. And as we started to get adoption in 2015, we started taking a look at GDPR, specifically Article 22, which is about interpretability of automated systems, as well as Article 25, which is privacy by design. And so, when we thought about it, we decided to re-architect the system, really mostly because of Article 22, which turns out actually isn't such a constraint, but we rewrote all of the multi-armed bandit and contextual bandit algorithms so that they could be interpretable. So we re-architected the system so that people who are using our software could parse the models so that they would know exactly how people would get assigned to different experiences. So really the reporting and the logic were what's known as sort of isomorphic. It's the same thing, and that way companies could feel comfortable that they weren't accidentally redlining or outside of their compliance policies and whatnot. And so that was a massive undertaking. And part of that was also following this idea of privacy by design and specifically data minimization. So our entire architecture is been designed following those privacy by design engineering principles, which is encoded in the GDPR. But for us, it made a lot of sense to design it that way because we've always had a slightly different perspective about the utility of experimentation programs more generally. Right now, you hear a lot about scale and velocity. And I think that's why there's a lot of companies that talk a lot about methods. And it's like, oh, this method will take 20% faster. It's always about doing something faster, but doing something mindless faster is still doing something mindless. And so for us, the real value of experimentation is really, ironically, and obviously this is important, but it's in a way that the tests are only part of the value. A lot of the value, or most of the value, is that it provides a principle, procedure, or framework for companies to be intentional about what it is they're learning and what actions they're taking, right? And so it allows them to think at the margin, what's the marginal value of taking this action over some other action with respect to how much we're improving the experience for a customer. So it's really like these two components. One is about being mindful and requiring people to be explicit about what it is they're doing, which also encourages people to think more deeply about what it is the customers actually might care for, and also that it's all being done in the service of the customer. So we like to talk about, rather than maximizing lifetime value of the customer, really you should be thinking about, at least if you think in sort of long-term relational ways as opposed to transactional ways, is how do you maximize the company's value to the customers, which is a little bit of a flip. And so we really take ideas from hospitality, and we really like the idea, this Japanese notion of omotenashi, which is, at least to the degree that I interpret it, is that it's really about being mindful about what you're doing and to be wholehearted in trying to execute what you're doing and to be in service of the customer. Danny Meyer, who is one of the main sort of hospitality thought leaders over here in the United States, he has this really nice expression where he talks about hospitality is more than the technical delivery of a service. It's about how that service makes the customer feel. And so we really think the whole idea is to be in the service of the customer. And so part of that is overlaps with data minimization, in that we really should be only asking the minimum set of things from, or information from the customers that's required to execute a service. It's disrespectful to ask someone, hey, if I were to ask you your opinion of something, and then I just ignore it, right?
Oh,
and I don't
absolutely.
acknowledge it, I ignore it. It's like, well, why did you just bother me with it? Why did you ask something of me that you didn't really need? And so it's nice that I think this approach, thinking of it from the sort of intentionality of design and why we're doing something in the service of others, is a richer framework or a richer attitude than the sort of the velocity scale idea, which is, I feel, is impoverished. It's really about transactions, and it leads people to be talking about numbers of tests that they're running per month or per year. And it really is about, and that way of thinking is really about what we're doing. We're running tests and we're doing stuff, as opposed to, well, what does it mean for the customer, and how are we servicing the customer?
But isn't that what experimentation, what your clients, Conductrics clients, are doing with experimentation? They need to figure out who their clients' customers are and make it work for them rather than for the brand they're working for. So it's kind of the same thing, just at a bit of a higher level. But you mentioned this a few times already, intentional data collection, actually. So the other side of that would be, or the other way to do it is, just in case, I'm just going to collect everything and anything under the sun. I guess, when you don't need browser information, but you store browser information in your platform, or I don't know, referral page that got the user there, whatever it is, when you're not acting on that information, that will be just in case mindset, I guess. So can you give me some examples where business outcomes have improved after someone switches from just in case to being intentional with data collection?
Well, I think so. I'd step back, and it's about being intentional with everything, and it's like, why are we doing something? And so I think organizations that are, uh, I guess another way of saying it is like, I think if you have an intentional culture where you get good editorial, you're focused on your customers, and you have engaged your employees are thinking of themselves as sort of the front line advocates for the customers. You can be successful even if you aren't doing experimentation, right? Like I think if you look at certain, my understanding is that at Apple they use a lot less of these methods than say many of the other companies. And so they have a strong editorial, or at least they certainly used to have strong editorial. And so they delivered design and products, hardware that their clients and their customers really love. So I think that's partly why I think it's really about not just, doing transactional behaviors. Like we're not thinking transactionally about just clicks and not just thinking transactionally about running experiments. With respect to the benefit, it's kind of mandated by GDPR. I mean, it's the law, at least in Europe, and I think also in the California Privacy Act. It's part of the law, and so a lot of it is you're exposing yourself in a way to additional risk, but there's also additional complexity. So it's now we have all of this extra data that we're collecting. We have no idea of its veracity. We haven't really thought about collecting it. So it's difficult. It's a bit of chicken and the egg. Is it that companies that just collect everything kind of have a mindless laziness about what they're doing? And so it's like that's the larger systemic problem, and it's just an approach. They really don't have a guiding principle about why they're doing certain things. And it could also be reflective of sort of a fear-based culture. So we're collecting everything just in case we need it. And it can also be based upon sort of magical thinking, which is like the next, it's like I often use the analogy of the gambler at the table who's losing. And it's that next hand that they've yet to play where their big payoff is and they'll get all their money back. It's always that next. And there's that mentality. And I think the problem with that mentality, beyond just the compute cost or the additional cost of buying all the software, is that it allows you to be seduced by magical thinking. Like it allows you to be not made a mark, but like someone's coming in and selling you some sort of technology or software that's going to solve this problem by claiming, we can link all this data. And so you'll be able to answer the question the CFO answers or whatever it happens to be. And so I just think that's one needs to be thoughtful about, well, what are the questions? And if you have a use case, then for sure you should collect it. So really, it's thinking at the margin for everything. What is the additional value and cost of taking this action versus what we're currently doing? And that extends to data collection, which is what's the value of this marginal bit? Like why, what do we get from that? And as an exercise, what one could do is if you have an established relationship between some data fields, you could kind of ask, well, what if we downsampled some sensitive data? Like to think about it, if there's certain data that you wouldn't want to get out and it would be a risk for your customers and for your company, well, could you downsample that and then, do the related regression or covariance analysis or correlation, I guess, and see, well, what's the difference? Like how much information actually have we lost? Has it altered the ability for us to execute for the customer? And if it does, then you shouldn't downsample it and it's fine. But if it really doesn't, then maybe you shouldn't be collecting it. Because in the principle too of privacy by design, the data minimization idea is really about reducing the sort of the cardinality, so like the granularity of any data field. So you want to have like the limited amount of granularity, and you also want to limit the number of data fields. So only take the data fields that really are required or going to be useful, or you have high expectation that will be useful. And then also the linkability. So like how, and this is one that's difficult for folks, it's just like minimizing how linkable that is to all the other data fields. And so that's why we use something called k-anonymization, which is the way we collect the data within our system, is that it's stored in a k-anonymous level, which is the data is stored in aggregate such that no individual, there's at least k other individuals that will look just like any other individual. So sort of the minimum value. And I don't want to bore your listeners in talking about k anonymous data, but it's like a useful measure to have some idea of like how identifiable is the data that we're collecting. And so I think in experimentation, it makes sense because we have, with experimentation, unlike analytics, it's like we have an explicit problem we're trying to solve. So it's like, I want to know whether or not if we alter this headline, it will affect response, right? So I have a hypothesis about that. And I want to test this other headline or these other headlines. And maybe there's what's known as sort of conditional treatment effects or heterogeneous treatment effects. And maybe it's that different clusters of users, different segments of users might prefer one headline over the other. And so you might want to run an experiment to validate and to collect information around that. So we have the question that, and now we collect the data for the question. So it's question first, and the data comes to answer that question. Unlike analytics, a lot of times, again, you're just collecting it and you don't really know how you're going to use it. And so it's much harder to ask this question about data minimization. And there are a lot of use cases where you do need to collect all of it. So I'm not trying to be paternalistic and saying there's one way to do it. It's just to think about it. And if you have a type of context where it makes sense to collect less, then you should probably do it. And there are ways to do that.
That's a great point. But let's take a step back and let's talk about just minimalization, minimalism in the physical realm. There's no one who is going to say to you, minimalism is a bad thing. They may say it's not for me, but no one will say, I disagree. I think you should hoard as much as possible because, I mean, that's not normal human behavior or common human behavior. Why is that so different in the digital space? I'm talking about data collection. I'm talking about adding things to your website that slows it down. I was a performance consultant for a very long time, and when I see someone add a script or a plugin to a website that they don't really need and then wonder why it got slower, like it's mind blowing. I assume it's at least kind of similar in data collection. So why is something that is so good and obvious in the physical realm invisible in the digital realm? Or it's invisible, of course it's digital, but yeah, why is it so different?
Well, I think I might push back on that. I don't know if I agree. I think in general, out in just in the world in general, more is considered more. And I think it's only for certain contexts that people are aware, or certain subsets of people that think less is more. And sometimes more is more. And a lot of times more is not more. And sometimes more is less and less is more. And I think if you look at just look at cars, automobiles now, and there's an ever increasing arms race to add more and more technology, which adds complexity, which makes actually maybe even impairs the safety of operating the automobile because you have all these menus and whatnot. And there's this trade-off between more often comes with more complexity, and complexity is a cost. And so I just think each time there's something more, that's another angle that someone can sell something. So it's like I can either have one product which has a certain set of attributes, or this other product which has all those attributes and more. And so that often is more compelling. And I think in our industry, and I think in most industries, you often see experimentation software or analytic software is sold, that someone tries to market some statistical approach or some sort of approach, which really actually is only can be useful. I'm not saying they're not useful, but often they're only useful for a very specific subset of problems, which a lot of clients, and if you have those problems, then it makes sense to buy that and use that approach. But for most clients, actually, it has no value other than to add complexity and cost. But a lot of times the purchaser or the folks who are consuming have to make these decisions are really overwhelmed, and they don't know whether or not they're going to need it or not. So again, there's this I think that the idea of maximalism in terms of data collection, as well as complexity and feature set of software or really automobiles or whatever it is, underneath it is this shadow objective of maximizing optionality. So as opposed to usually when you're trying to like design something elegant, which is like the minimum set required for the service or the product to operate as it's expected to, efficient design, you have sort of flabby design, I guess, which is around this idea of maximizing optionality. It's like, I'm not really sure, and it's a way of mitigating perceived risk, and I might use it. So for example, we have when we moved down here to Texas from the Northeast, we drove down in a small car, and when we were driving from Dallas to Austin on 35, anyone who's driven on 35, it's terrifying. I was like terrifying. Like every truck, everything was huge. And so we bought a larger SUV, which is like 4-wheel drive, and it's got low, it's like can go off-road, all this nonsense, which is like, I just bought it because it was reliable and bigger, but it actually has all this equipment that people buy it for but never use. Like literally almost nobody ever uses any of all this complexity and cost and weight. And so people buy things for the ability to do something that they'll never use, perhaps. And that's I think a lot of it. So I don't know if it's always true that people agree. I don't think they frame it as hoarding. I think they frame it as extra capacity. But there's a cost for it that,
which again is just in case.
Yeah, if you're intentional, and that's why it's like intentional. So sometimes if you are going to go off-road, that's a better automobile. That's what you need. But if you aren't, in fact, actually, if you're intentional about it, it's like, I know I'm not going to do it, but I still like the idea of it. I think that's okay. That again, it's not for me to say, but I think if you're just like, you haven't thought about it and you're just like, yeah, there's more capability, and that's why you're buying something which actually might make things worse for you, for the organization, then that's something that you might want to think about.
That's pretty bad.
It just gets back to being aware.
Great point. And let's not get into the US versus Europe war, small cars, big cars, because trust me, it is very, very different here in European Union. If the cars are tiny, the parking spots are equally tiny, but you can find one. And cars are very different. Like, you've been in Europe.
Well, actually, I think that's related to experimentation as well, because a lot of experimentation, and we were talking about this before we started, which was sort of about operating in the world and getting feedback from the world to hone an experience or to hone a product. And I think that actually is a reflection of I think that's like such a good example of where the environment is giving feedback to optimize the automobile, because I have had the fortune to live over in the UK and in France. And when we were in the UK, when we would drive about, it was just so clear, because the roads, because of the environment and the infrastructure, you would want a smaller car. You would not want a larger car. So it's less about the people and more about the environment, the architecture, the cost of, not just the cost of energy, but just the utility of the tool. And so it informs what is made. So it's optimized. Those cars are optimized for that environment. I think if you're a European and you came and you lived in Texas, let's say, you'd be more likely to get something bigger than you would have in Europe, because it's what fits the environment. And of course there's externalities to that we don't have to get into. So I'm not advocating something is superior, but it's just an example of that's part of experimentation. It's like you're letting your customers, by their behavior, inform what their preferences are. Like it's like this, sort of reveal preference about what actually it is they care about. And it's sort of the same thing. I think it's almost like that's a heterogeneous treatment effect where you have one environment, which let's say is the US or maybe Canada, I don't know. And then you have something like, the UK, and you have a different treatment effect where it's like a smaller car is going to be preferred on average in the UK, and a larger car will be preferred in the United States. And that's sort of, not exactly, but it's sort of like an A/B test with heterogeneous treatment effects or conditional treatment effects.
That's a wonderful parallel. Now, before you get too comfortable, there's some rapid fire questions, and then we'll go into the deep dive section. So I will just read these. It's 5 questions, and try to keep it to 10 or 20 seconds. Like, this is supposed to not make a lot of sense. So just whatever comes to mind.
I'm great at that. Not making sense. I got it. We're good.
Let's go. What is one thing businesses should stop doing when it comes to data collection? If you had to choose one.
Collecting more than they need. Or I would say magical thinking around it. It's like know your problem first, then collect the data. It's the problem. It's all about problem definition. Data is irrelevant.
Basically.
Data is irrelevant outside of a problem.
That's a great one. Moving on to the second one. Define ethical data in one sentence.
Oh gosh, I don't even know what that would mean, ethical data. I could think
Let's
of
say ethical data collection. Yep.
I'd say ethical behavior is to be accountable, honest, and forthright, and that extends to data collection, but any other behavior that the company might be engaging in. I think our work is a reflection of who we are. There's not this Dickensian separation between our work life and our personal life. It's like it is a reflection of who we are, and it is our obligation to behave, I believe, ethically.
Excellent. What is the most exciting right now? What is the most exciting future tech for data management and or experimentation?
Conductrix. So
I love that. I love that. No.
But really,
moving on.
but
we'll
what's
get back
exciting?
to Conductrix.
But what's exciting? But I think to be consistent, what's exciting is going to be, I think, conditioned on what the problems are, like what it is you're trying to solve. And so I know that was for me to talk about Gen AI and artificial intelligence. But I really do think, and I know this is supposed to be rapid fire, but I think it is a mistake. And this is just my way of looking at it, I should just speak for myself, is to be seduced by solutions. I think one should be clear-eyed about what it is that you're trying to achieve. And there's nothing wrong with exploring and learning about new technologies, new approaches, but to gallop off to using some new technology just to use or for signaling, I think is often a mistake. So what is exciting is whatever approach or technology might help you solve certain problems.
That was a great political answer, but I'll allow it. What is the most speaking of AI, the most surprising impact of AI on data privacy that people do not talk about enough?
Oh, I'm not, to be honest, I'm not an expert in that field. And so I try not to speak in areas that I'm not fully versed in. I will say at least for us, we are much more conservative. I find it surprising how quickly folks in our space are using some of these tools. I think it is concerning that, folks will put in a lot of business or private data to be aggregated in some of these systems where it's unclear whether or not that information is leaking back into the development of sort of the next foundational model or to be included. And since really these LLMs, a large part of their utility is in that they're sort of like compression machines, and they are storing the information that's fed into them. And so that's more of a concern, I would think, which is that you are potentially leaking corporate as well as personal information out into the world. So I think it's the cavalier nature of use, and I think that maybe it's like sort of early days of social networks where folks were maybe less cognizant about privacy risks and
Yep.
they would share maybe too much. And I think it's very easy to share too much and very easy for individuals within an organization to share information about the organization that they really are not entitled to share.
So would you say the most surprising thing is how appealing it is? Because if it's making people who should know better share all this information willingly and are excited about it, isn't that like
I don't know if
early
they
days
should
of
know
social
better.
media?
I think
Wow.
I don't put, I think there's the sort of the zeitgeist out there, which is there's a panic. I think, I mean, I try to have empathy, and I think people are really afraid and fear. I mean, and fear, I think fear is what drives that data maximalist approach. And I think fear is in part, people don't want to be left behind. And so it's not clear, what the long-term effects are of a lot of these behaviors. And so I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know if it should know better. I think a lot of times, I don't think there's a reason why people should. I wouldn't put it back on the individuals. I just think it's just not always clear to folks. And there's a gradient to act, as opposed to, there's sort of the, not to make it, there's sort of the be a man of, be a person of action, right? And there's always like this pressure to like act and think later, which is sort of antithetical to experimentation. But
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
The final one, what is the best career advice you have ever received?
The best piece of advice I can give is don't be part of the machine, and
How
really
long after
think
that did you
about.
quit your job? And start
Well, I
Conductrics?
wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't part of the machine, but well, maybe at certain levels I was, but
A
we all are. But
realization,
it's don't be an if your job is really being an operator of a certain technology, that's perishable. And once that technology goes away, if you don't have larger understanding or larger abstractions and you have non-perishable skills, then that, I think, is the risk. And I think those are the types of jobs that might be supplanted by automation and AI. And so just being able to operate via prompt or what have you, a language model, I think that's a short-term value. And with anything, I think you want to not be an operator of
I'm
a
glad you
technology.
used that particular example in the end, because I think we could talk about that for an hour. Because when I see AI expert, what do? I write prompts. I don't know. I wouldn't call that an AI expert. Like I know what.
It's cringe. Like, I can't believe
Yeah.
it. Like, I don't call. I mean, I shouldn't even say it that way, but like, I for sure am not an AI expert. But I have a graduate degree in artificial intelligence, and it's like I know, but I know people who are, and it's like, and it's shocking to me how there's so many people, especially like on, LinkedIn. There's like a lot of like blowhards, just in general, and but I think that's again, which is like when you were talking about people should know. It's confusing out there because they see a lot of content by folks who have, never talked about AI 4 years ago, right? It's only now. And so there's a lot of, seeing a parade and trying to run up to the front to lead the parade type of behavior.
One thing I do when I see someone really being super vocal about being an AI expert, just go through their history, and if you find drop shipping, crypto, or NFT, run, because that person is just jumping from one hot thing to the next one, trying to sell a course, very likely.
Well, you'll even see it in our space. So, it had been like, a lot of it is confounded with venture capital. So like in our space, there's a lot of companies that are venture funded, which means they all had to go to Silicon Valley and ask and get money. So they're self-selected, they're clustered in a way. And so they come from a similar culture. And, and so there's a lot of discussion, like they were, the whole modern data stack, whatnot, was in a way sort of a reflection of all of the value that was created from Snowflake and sort of composability and shunting SQL around and all that stuff. And so that was a period of interest for venture. And so you see a lot of companies that speak that way have been funded. And now you see a lot of them now trying to find any angle to talk about AI, even though AI in a way is orthogonal, is is sort of perpendicular to experimentation. In fact, I think experimentation is a great place to be in, because one of the things that, at least currently, at least the generative AI approach is, they're really about aggregating information that exists. But like, as we were talking about with the automobiles, we were talking about like, learning from the environment about how to optimize. When we have new problems, really what you need to do is experiment in the world. You need to actually go out in the world and see how the world behaves with respect to the different interventions or the different actions that you're taking. And that's really something that AI, currently at least AI is really about, sort of aggregating and sort of mixing content together. And so there's always going to be a need, regardless if it's your great editorial team that came up with the idea, or if it was AI that came out with the idea, it still needs to be tested to see whether or not actually the belief about the efficacy of the new treatment or experience actually plays out in the market, in the real world.
I completely agree. I just saw a LinkedIn post an hour before this recording. Someone wrote, ironically, jokingly, about, I'll create 3 months worth of LinkedIn content for you in an hour, based on AI. Here's the AI prompt to do that.
Mm-hmm.
When you see something like that, I mean, ideation, sure, absolutely, go for it. But if you think you'll get a finished product that's worth of 3 months of your content, it's just that it's not a tool that's supposed to do it. It's just, like you said, it's just spitting out things that someone else said at some other point to some other audience about another topic. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you still need to hold the wheel. A human still needs to hold the wheel, basically. That's my take.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't say that it was just spitting out. I didn't use the word spitting out.
I did.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though. So we don't even really need to drop into like that level. It could be like, well, we could push back and say, well, maybe it is effective, and that's something to test. So we could have an experiment where you just have, whatever system is generating content, assuming you have some sort of measurable objective or some sort of goal you're trying to achieve, that is potentially influenced by the decision of whether or not we use just AI created content for 3 months versus some sort of, or no content and some sort of editorial curated content. And that's still something that needs to be done, is to experiment to see whether or not it's effective or not. And so that's why I'm saying I think experimentation will be, something that will be one of the last areas, if at all, that will be supplanted.
Let's see if that's what happens. I think you're right, but let's see how that plays out. Let's just talk about final topic, intentional data collection, specifically in A/B testing. So what is the Conductrics way?
Yeah, so for us, and again, like, at least for experimentation, at least the way our software works, and again, this doesn't need to be universal for everyone. It's like, if you have cases where this is not the way you want to do it, that's okay. That's okay. But for us, especially like in like the HIPAA domain or anything where a company cares about being compliant with GDPR, and like, look, if you don't care, like if your company is like, whatever, that's like, we don't care about that. I don't care. That's fine. Like, I'm not here to convince anyone about whether or not they should care about GDPR or data minimization. Really, it's like, if you don't give a damn, great. That's fine. But if you do, this is like a way to think about it and a potential way to like go about solving for it. So I just want to be clear about that. It's like, you do you, and if this is something that's of interest, then great. And I would say like experimentation or A/B tests are really nice fit, is because you do have to be explicit about what problem you're solving. And so then you think through like, what types of data do we want to collect? Now for us, that just means what we want to do is sort of think about, I don't want to lose the audience here, but like how the term we like to use is like cardinality. It's like, what is like, how finely can you break up your customers, right? And so for us, we kind of are able to like ask you, if there's any additional data that you would want to collect alongside with the experimental data, And then we can also like know, well, roughly how many people, what's like the minimum unique set of customers that look like one another. That's sort of that K and K anonymous. It's like how identifiable. And so that can be quite useful because you can think through, you don't have to worry as much. You can be compliant with principle 2, which is privacy by design, and data minimization is part of that. And so a lot of the compliance conversation, and it was one of the reasons why we built it. We were just frustrated with the compliance conversation, which was really, a lot of it is around legalese and procedures, but there was never really like, well, how would you actually do it? What's on the engineering side of things? And there's a whole subfield called privacy engineering. And there's a bunch of different methods on how to engineer software and systems so that they have certain properties. And one of them is this idea of data minimization, which is sort of like the core fundamental idea. And we felt like that was very compelling because it was both allowed one to be respectful of your customers, so focused on your customers, so you're more respectful by not collecting more information than you need. You're compliant, or helps you be compliant with the law, so to the degree that you care about that. And then thirdly, it's completely consistent with this idea of being aware and being intentional about why we're collecting stuff, and it's not adding all this cruft to the system, which makes it much more difficult to audit if you did need to be compliant. It requires, and that's one of the things we're actually looking at, is like, how much less energy it requires to do the computation, because in a way, it allows us to know beforehand. There's the ideas of compressibility and sparsity of data. And so if you know ahead of time, that means a lot of the computation can be much more efficient. And that means that we can add, more, normally computationally expensive analysis, like the conditional treatment effect, or
Right.
like efficient versions of Cupid, or A/B test interactions. Like all of those things can be done very efficiently if you don't assume that you need to collect the data at the individual level. Things get much more computationally expensive. It's like a naive way to do all that computation. I know this is a little bit in the weeds, but there's a lot of advantages to having a system that employs the idea of data minimization. But mostly it's around, wanting to ensure that you don't possibly leak customer information.
Matt, I'm thankful for you being on No Hacks. Where can people get in touch with you? Where can people find you online?
Oh, well, we're on LinkedIn, but also you can come to conductrics.com and reach out to us there. We have, a blog post which delves into some more technical details. So please feel free to reach out to us either from the website, or we're always, also if you're on the TLC, so we'll promote Kelly Wortham's Test and Learning channel, you can reach out and to the podcast if you want to be invited to that. And we're also there answering questions.
And that will be testandlearn.community, right? The website.
I believe so. Yep. That's a Slack channel. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.